Now, before we get started on what was a fairly odd day yesterday in the world of the NFL draft, every live show brought to you by our good friends over at herosoapcompany.com. Go on over to herosoapcompany.com. Use that promo code Huddle Up for 10% off of your first purchase. Also, every post game, every show is brought to you by our good friends over at vocalbreaks.com. Vocalbreaks.com is the best when it comes to all things recording, when it comes to all things in regards to podcasting, when it comes to music production, whether you're a DJ, doesn't matter what it is, guys. You control the aspect when it comes to your future in music production. So if you want the best, do not settle for less. Use code LucasHill10 for 10% off of your monthly subscription using that promo code LucasHill10. Day 2 finished up yesterday in the NFL draft. And guess who's still on the board? None other than number 2 himself. Just so y'all can hear me better. So let's go through a little bit of this real fast before we continue on and talk about Shedeur at this point. Wow. I knew that Shedeur was going to slip. My thing is I didn't expect him to slip past the first round. I thought Pittsburgh was likely going to be his best chance. I didn't expect for him to fall this bad. Look, man, he had a lot. There's just a lot that you're speechless about, to the point where you go with the following quarterbacks before Shedeur Sanders. Tyler Shaw, who I had a 5th-round grade on. By the way, 25 years old. Everybody says he's pro-ready, but, I mean, are you willing to take a chance on a guy that's that old at this point of his career, who's bounced around from a couple of different teams around college football? Merely stating. You go from that, you go get Jalen Milroe, you get Dylan Gabriel. That's in you have 5 quarterbacks picked before Shedeur Sanders. In my opinion, he's probably 2 or 3 on that list, according to some people. I didn't have a problem with him slipping past the first 10 picks of the second round. I thought maybe a team like LA, maybe a team like I don't know, maybe Tennessee, maybe the Raiders could pick him up. Somebody like that. But to see Shedeur slip this far is incredible to me. But we talked about this yesterday. You shouldn't be surprised. Because we talk so much about Shedeur's future and what he did during his time at Colorado. Mind you, dude had a lot of baggage. And you're gonna look at me and you're gonna think, well, why am I harping on his baggage? Guys, you gotta understand. I mean, you can't go into a situation and go into interviews with NFL coaches. Mind you, I didn't have a problem with him not throwing at the combine. That wasn't an issue to me. But guys, he's documented how he's not ready for the pro level. How, despite the talent, despite what he can bring to an NFL franchise. He's an unathletic guy. Yes, I know he scrambles around a lot, but majority of the time, he puts himself in his own bad situations. So many of his sacks that he has, he forced them on his own self. The lack of trust that you see from him, the immaturity, the entitlement. This kid hasn't really had to work for a quarterback spot because he's been with his dad all of his life, ever since high school. Dad takes over at Jackson State, follows him. He's a starting quarterback. Follows him over at Colorado, starting quarterback. What does that say about an NFL team? Has his jersey retired? For what reason? Which I'll be honest with you, I didn't see a point in retiring this kid's jersey. But I will say this: Shedeur Sanders is getting a very big reality check. Knowing that, I understand you may be frustrated as a Sanders guy right now, knowing that no team is taking a chance on you. But guys, you did this to yourself. You put out on social media bashing your old teammates that entered the portal. You went out and said, "Thank you, God," every time the Raiders lost because you wanted to go to Las Vegas. And I don't have a problem with the tweet. What I have a problem is that you're putting it on display saying you exclusively want to go to Vegas. Acting like the organization was going to need you. And mind you, guys, this is not a quarterback heavy class. The need for a quarterback is not at an all-time high. I know 6 got picked already. And to me, Giants shouldn't have picked a quarterback. Jalen's going to be fine with being under Sam Darnold. I do wish that he'd be better off in Sean McVay's offense. Who else do we have? We got I'm trying to think. We had Dylan Gabriel go to Cleveland. Good luck. That's all I can say to that. I would have rather picked Will Howard. Will Howard and Riley Leonard are still on the board, and that boggles my mind. I'm shocked when I hear that Will Howard's still on the board. It blows my ever-loving mind to hear that. But I do think that this needs to be a humbling experience for Shedeur. He ain't a good quarterback. I don't care what people will say. I don't care that you think that Shedeur puts up eye-popping numbers. I don't care that people think that, oh, he's got the biggest arm in the game. When you act like a peckerhead in your freaking interviews and you act entitled, that's when things start to get messy. So this is your fault. This is your fault, dude. Maybe next time in your interviews, you act like a professional. Maybe you act like you have some class about yourself. Don't go into these interviews cocky. Treat people like they're a professional, like they're worthy of your time, because you're going into a freaking job interview. And you ended up being such a freaking peckerhead that At the end of the day, guys, you have done it to yourself. That's all I can say, guys. I mean, this is incredible. So, yes, I do have a. I am at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if Shedeur goes undrafted. They don't want his baggage going to their team. They don't want the big show that he's about to bring. They need to hear this, whether they like it or not. So when you look at where Shedeur is at right now, you got to look at his character off the field. Look at what he's posted on social media. Look at how he approaches other things. So whether you like it or not, guys, that's the truth. That's the reality of where we are when it comes to Shedeur Sanders. So whether y'all like my take or not, that's a reality. This is a huge reality check for Shedeur Sanders. So that's the reality that we're in right now. But let's get into the rest of day 2. All right. So I'll talk about a couple of key guys that got drafted. I will say Carson Schwezinger, pretty interesting pickup for the Cleveland Browns. I think he's going to make a huge impact. Really athletic wide receiver. The one I think that won day 2 was Houston. I think the Texans put together a pretty good draft so far. I know we're not done with it yet, but still. I mean, you've gotten some dudes already in the first 4 picks that you've had. So you start off with getting a guy like you got your 2 Iowa State receivers in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, which I thought was incredible that you were able to do that. Truly remarkable. Jalen Noel is going to bring you that special teams aspect to his game. Jaden Higgins is going to be a guy that you can line up on the outside and he'll win 50-50 balls. And I think that Houston would like to have more depth at receiver. I think that receiver was a pretty big need for you going into 2025. Just knowing what the wide receiver room was going to look like with Nico Collins, with Braxton Berrios, or not Braxton Berrios, but just with all that you had so far with Christian Kirk that you just signed. Obviously losing, a guy like Stephon Diggs, who you just traded after 1 year, which I thought was interesting. Do I have a problem with it? Not really, because as good as the season started for him, you knew obviously they had to move on from him because of the injury bug and just with what his future just looked like at the end of the day. So I think it's important that you moved on from Stephon Diggs. He wasn't worth the cap space. And I think ultimately you got to build some youth around a guy like CJ Stroud. So I think those were 2 important pieces that you needed to get. The 2 Iowa State kids, they're both going to be incredible to pair with a guy like Nico Collins, who coming off a back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons. You just got Braxton Berrios from Miami and New England or New York. He's going to be more of your special teamer. He'll be a pretty interesting one. Mechie, I'm still waiting for Mechie to break out. Because, dude, John Mechie can play football. But I think if he doesn't produce this year, that's when you're starting to go ahead and move on from a guy like that, which I would not be surprised if they are to do so. So, plus you get the signing of Christian Kirk after a pretty unsuccessful 3-year tenure in Jacksonville where he was basically hurt majority of the time. So, okay. That was one where I thought Houston really dominated. Not only that, you got arguably one of the more underrated DBs in this draft class in Jalen Smith. He's a guy that I thought was really incredible this year. Watched him at the Senior Bowl, showed out, had a pretty good couple of days out in one-on-ones. And I think that with what Jalen's going to bring to the table, it makes perfect sense. I really like Jalen Smith, and I thought he was one of the more underrated DBs in college football this past year. And I thought that he's going to make an impact pretty significant. I know he took a somewhat of a step back after last year, but he's a shutdown corner, guys. Jalen Smith can make any DB or can make any receiver silly. He can really do some damage. Plus, you got the Big Ten's best offensive lineman in Arante Ursary, or whatever his name is. But that's a big pick for you because you need some interior depth. Guys, Houston's offensive line got freaking rocked last year. CJ Stroud needs some more time in the pocket, and I think that's what you're going to get with a young offensive lineman in there. The worst picks of the draft, though. The New Orleans Saints. You have to go into this one with a grain of salt. Now, I understand where the Saints are kind of coming from, but, I mean, dude, this hasn't been a very good draft so far. Now, you got Kelvin Banks, who won the Outland and Lombardi this past year. He's probably going to fill in that need that you needed for the offensive line, because gone is Trevor Penning after this year because they just declined his 5th-year option. He's been a complete disaster. I think you can move Trevor to guard to give yourself some guard depth, because last year the interior of the offensive line was atrocious. Just straight up atrocious, dude. So Kelvin Banks definitely brings that need for you. And I think he can make a pretty significant impact at that right tackle position. So I think he can really do some damage as a outside guy, a guy that I think can really make an impact alongside Talisi Fuaga, who, in my opinion, those two combined are going to make for some of the best 2 tackles in the NFL in the next few years. We already saw Fuaga break out earlier last year. Shows a lot of early promise so far in his young career. Now you get Kelvin Banks alongside. But I think you definitely should have addressed the defensive line. That first round you had on the board, you had Mykel Williams, you had Jalen Walker. But, I mean, hey, maybe in the 4th round you can go get Kyle Kennard, who's still on the board. May I remind you, Kyle Kennard is still a guy that can make a significant impact. Who, by the way, won the Bednarik Award last year and was an All-American. Guys, we got to see him at Senior Bowl action, got to talk with him. Guys, Kyle Kennard is a dude. One, the Nagurski was a consensus All-American. I think it's a shame that he wasn't picked yet. And I know people are going to say, well, it's a speed off the edge. What's this? What's that? Take a chance on the guy. I don't understand. This is one where I just flip my stuff. You got Tyler Shao. Now, if you want to go get a 26-year-old quarterback, he'll turn 26 in September, by the way. Guys, 26 years old. I know people are saying that he's an NFL-ready quarterback. Dude, you got to get youth. That's what this draft is about. I feel like Mickey Loomis is just imploding this draft at this point. So, you know that the Saints are going to move on at this point. So him being Tyler Shao being a starter after his rookie season, it doesn't seem very likely. This idea that Rattler is going to be your starter is unlikely. I don't think Spencer Rattler is the future. I don't know if even Tyler Shao is the future. I don't have that high of a ceiling for Tyler Shao. I think he's a guy that's going to be a career backup. I don't think anything else will come of what he's bringing to the table. But other than that, guys, I don't really know what he's going to look like in the next year. Because to be honest with you guys, it just doesn't seem to make sense that you go get a guy like that. When I would rather have more confidence in Will Howard or Riley Leonard running my offense. I am merely stating this because this was not a smart pick. You got to go get youth, dude. That's your number one guy. You got Vernon Broughton from Texas, who I thought he was going to be in the senior. I think he was there day one, but I don't remember, though. His buddy Barron Sorrell, who we got to talk to earlier. But Broughton's a pretty good prospect. I would have picked out Barron Sorrell, to be honest with you. He's going to be a pretty solid backup, but to me, he's really just another 4. I thought he had a pretty good season for the Longhorns last year, but to be honest with you, I don't know what his future is going to look like with them. So he could develop himself into a top tier interior guy. I don't know, man. Then you got Jonas Sanker, who I know people liked what he brought to the table. Guys, you had Xavier Watts still on the board. I didn't really like how he played. I know he had a pretty decent pro day, and I know that he wasn't as bad as what people thought he was. Ran a 4.48 40 to go along with a 36.5-inch vert. But in my opinion, you had a 2-time All-American still on the board in Xavier Watts, who I know was dealing with injury. But guys, go take a chance on the All-American. And now you let your rival in the Atlanta Falcons go pick him up, who they've had a pretty good draft themselves. So the kid has a lot of areas to clean up his game. I think Xavier Watts would have been the better choice between him and Sanker. So there's no telling for me, just knowing what this team is going to get. The Arizona Cardinals, dude, they came out guns a freaking blazing. You got the All-American Walter Nolan. You got actually, I think you got 3 All-Americans this year. No, you just got 2. But you got a guy like Walter Nolan in the first round who I expected to go first round. I think that's a very, very big pick for Arizona to really clean up their pass rush department. You got Will Johnson, who's going to make an impact at DB. I'm shocked that he fell that far in the second round. And then you got Jordan Birch, who's coming from Oregon as a third team All Big Ten in selection. He had all three had very productive years. I'm really intrigued to see what Walter Nolan and Will Johnson can bring out on that defensive side of the ball. Dude, the Falcons I think they got 3 All-Americans, dude. In my opinion, they have 3 All-American defensive players on this team. You were talking about James Pierce, Jalen Walker, and Xavier Watts. Holy cow, I could build a defensive roster there. It would not surprise me if Atlanta comes out on the other side with the number 1 defense in all of the NFL. Not to mention Baltimore getting Mike Green and Malachi Starks. Dude, Malachi Starks is going to pair well with Kyle Hamilton. Because now Kyle Hamilton can move down to that corner role. Now Malachi can move up to that free. I think it'd be a pretty interesting combination between the two. Not to mention Emory Jones can be your left tackle for a guy like Lamar Jackson. Buffalo, this was an interesting one. You got Maxwell Harrison, who I think is the most underrated DB in this draft class. We got to see him at the Senior Bowl. Not to mention TJ Sanders, who we got to interview at Senior Bowl action, and then Landon Jackson, who can pair alongside Joey Bosa very well. Dude, Carolina came out swinging. They got Princely Mumin Milan. You got Nick Scourton from Texas A&M. By the way, those are 2 first-team All-Big Ten selections. Not to mention Tetorosha McMillan, T-Mac, who is going to make a big impact. Let me tell you one that's pretty interesting. Cleveland has come out. They've gotten 5 draft picks already. You've bulked up on the defensive side of the ball. You got Mason Graham to pair along with Myles Garrett. Not to mention with getting Carson Schwezinger in the middle of the field. Your running back department, you got a capable backup in Quinshon Judkins. Tight end room is going to look good with David Njoku and Harold Fannin in the building. And then Dylan Gabriel as potentially your starter for this year, I guess. I mean, I don't know what to expect with Dylan Gabriel, to be honest with you. Dallas got 2 studs who I think a lot of people had in the first round in Donovan Ezraku, the ACC's Defensive Player of the Year, and Siobhan Revel, who a lot of people had as an early favorite to go in the first round this year. Both guys can be really dominant in their quest to be in top-tier defensive players for the Dallas Cowboys. I think Booker, it's a pretty solid pick, knowing that you lost Tyron Smith and Zach Martin to retirement. So you need a young guy to fill in that role, and I think that's what Booker's going to bring you at the end of the day. Denver is going to be loaded on the offensive side of the ball. You get RJ Harvey, who's one of the more underrated backs in the Big Ten. Or in the Big Ten. You got the Big 12, actually. You got Pat Bryant, who, to me, was the best receiver was a top 5 receiver in the Big Ten last year. You know, I know people are going to talk about the Emeka Egbukas and the Jeremiah Loves, and I'm not doubting that they're not top tier. And people are going to talk about Tez Johnson and all this other great receivers. But, dude, I would make a contention that Pat Bryant was one of those elite receivers. Dude, route running wise, incredible. Absolutely an incredible pick that I had a lot of love for. Detroit, what are we doing? Let me ask you a question. Tyleik Williams, Dude, you need another guy to pair along with Aiden Hutchinson. And I thought that either TJ Sanders or a um, Mike Green, those would have been better options for you other than that. Even Will Johnson. You need another guy to pair along with Brian Branch. But what do I know? Green Bay's getting two pretty good receivers with Matthew Golden and Savion Williams. But in my opinion, the winner so far of this draft has to be the Houston Texans. Knowing what you've done so far to get the two Iowa State kids, you got a solid interior guy, one that can transition between tackle and guard, not to mention a shutdown corner. That calls for a team that can steadily improve with CJ Stroud as your quarterback. And I think it starts with that receiving core that has to step up. I know you got a lot of help from Stephon Diggs through the first few games of the year. Then he ends up getting hurt. But for Nick Caley, who's going to come in for his first year after you just lost out on Bobby Slowick, who I think they just fired. But can Caley improve this offense? Is from what he brings with Sean McVay's offense, is it truly going to be enough to change this team? I don't know. We'll just have to see whenever we get into that point. Because there is a lot that you have to improve, specifically in the receiving room. The fact that you were able to get the two Iowa State kids, beyond my belief. I think it was incredible that you were able to do that. Okay. So, in my opinion, the biggest steal from rounds 2 and 3, I would have to say either Mike Green or Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. Because, dude, you nabbed two guys that were 1,000-yard receivers at Iowa State. You pair them along with a guy like CJ Stroud, there's no telling what that offense is going to look like at the end of the day. All right, that's going to end it for us. We'll see y'all at some point. I'll try and go live sometime tomorrow night if I feel like it. And yeah, man, can't wait to see y'all there. Y'all have a good one.